Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Michael Famoroti. It's a pleasure to be here. First of all, I'd just like to thank the Excellency, the Governor of Nasarawa State, Engineer Sule, and His Excellency, the Deputy Governor of Nasarawa State, Dr. Nakabe. I would also just like to stand on existing protocols and thank my panelists and virtual panelists for joining us this afternoon. Thank you all as well. I know this is second day. You've all been very good. You've been a very good audience so far. Today, our plenary, we're going to focus on promoting a knowledge-based economy. So before I dive in with my panelists, I'd just like to set the scene a little bit for the conversation. So far, over the last 2 days, we've spoken a lot about hard things, right? Infrastructure, agriculture, employment, and so on. These remain key for Nigeria and Nasarawa, to be specific. However, as we move through the fourth industrial revolution, the importance of knowledge, data, and technology grows clearer every day. Today's session is all about unpacking that and looking at how Nasarawa, even as it focuses on its physical advantages, can begin to set up the institutions, policies, and businesses that can ensure that it does not get left behind in the knowledge-based economy. Thankfully, I am accompanied by experts in the field that should be able to help us discuss that today. Before we do so, I would just like to share a perspective on how to think about the knowledge-based economy. And to do this, I'm actually going to borrow from the World Bank's Digital Economy Pillars framework. And essentially, the digital economy pillars are all about helping people to transition from the traditional physical real economy to thinking about the knowledge-based digital economy. So just like how in the real economy, you have pillars like financial services, energy, infrastructure, housing, and so on, in the digital economy, there are central pillars that each economy must build to ensure that the whole is complete. Now, these 5 pillars are digital entrepreneurship, digital platforms, digital skills, digital financial services, and most importantly, digital infrastructure. As we go along today, we're likely going to touch on these different areas and hopefully build out a perspective to help us, again, answer the question of how does Nasarawa transition and promote a knowledge-based economy. So having said that, my first question to my panelists is a very basic one, right? And that question is, why is this discussion of a knowledge-based economy so important? So, Dr. Sam, can we start with you?
Thank you very much. Well, I think maybe almost self-evident, because if you look at our global economic competitiveness, we need to transition to higher value creation. Just like the example in one of the programs talked about Zenith Bank access to capital and Flutterwave. So what we've seen, and that's the driver of knowledge economy, is that the knowledge industries dominate more than the usual low skill and even capital-based industry. So knowledge creates more value. You see that, for example, if you look at the array of billionaires, richest people in the world, you see that the top echelon, the top most captured by people who are dealing with knowledge, information arbitrage, or other form of knowledge production. So essentially, knowledge has the capacity to add more value and bring more revenue. And again, knowledge itself is an industry that has domino effect. So if you create a knowledge economy, you keep on reaping reward as innovation. It builds up, the ecosystem develops, it seeps into other sectors. And so for example, Finland with Nokia, which was the star innovative company. But then it makes Finland now probably one of those with the highest level of patents and all that, an economy that is now very rich because of its focus on technology innovation. And you look at even Korea, when they started, movement from agro to manufacturing, but once they get into knowledge economy, they also grew and became rich. Israel. So the point is that this is how we can create much more value, both in terms of revenue, in terms of a much more sustainable economic development, and of course, it has implications for even social development and even democracy, because knowledge workers themselves are more, they are better citizens and also more important for democracy and social cohesion. So I think it's self-evident why we should move from conventional economy to knowledge economy, because we're going to reap much more financial and non-financial value.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me? It's working. Okay. So the question is, why are we talking about knowledge economy? Why are we looking at the digital economy? So in general, right, the digital economy has continued to move at an unprecedented speed and rate. And currently, it constitutes about 15.5% of the global GDP. Now, according to a research by ITU, that's the International Telecommunication Union, it says just a 10% increase in mobile broadband penetration in Africa would result in a 2.5% increase in GDP per capita of any economy within that. So what this is saying in essence is, you know, for developing countries to achieve their development agenda, they actually have to leverage and key into the positive potentials of the digital economy to leapfrog their development agendas. And I'm going to give you a typical example. During the COVID-19 pandemic, what happened? We all moved to the digital workspace. Every parastatal ministry, MDAs, they all started working remotely, leveraging technology, internet, and mobile applications to communicate with each other. So if that doesn't emphasize the importance of moving into a knowledge-based and digital economy, I don't think there's any other thing that would.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sam and Farida. I just want to confirm from the session coordinators that the other panelists are able to join virtually. I know, okay, I can see, okay, all right, so please do jump in. Can you unmute his mic so that he can answer the question as well?
Thank you very much, Michael. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
So, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be on this panel. I also bid good afternoon to all our dignitaries. Thank you very much for inviting us to speak. Knowledge-based economy, there's an example that was used by Dr. Amadi now, the example of Flutterwave. I remember reading on WhatsApp some few days ago that what it took Zenith Bank, for example, to build over 30 years, which is their capital, their strength. It has taken Flutterwave barely 10 years to achieve that same position within the market. That tells you that the kind of power that is in a knowledge-based economy. We have moved from the traditional modes of building businesses to share technology knowledge. Now, my own perspective on this deals with the issue of the rule of law. There are two things that keeps an investor up in bed at night. And that is the profitability of his investment and the fear of losing his capital. And that's where the rule of law comes in. The rule of law simply means what it says, that the law rules. The law governs the relationship between the investor and the host states like Nasarawa state. Not the rule of discretion, not the rule of religious or society fraternity, not the rule of man knows man, but the rule of law. And how does that work? Very briefly, the rule of law is broken into three parts. One, equality before the law. if you have an investor coming from Osun State or coming from Cross River, and the law must treat everyone equally as if they were bona fide citizens of Nasarawa State. Second, access to justice. I've looked at the program and I saw the establishment of the Small Claims Court, which is a very good initiative. An investor wants to have prompt access to justice. And lastly, compensation if anything comes up, if there's any problem, which goes to the issue of expropriation. Expropriation directly, either if the state takes over a running business, or indirectly, if there are problems with taxation or a conflict, say, Sharia law that is giving the investor problems. So that these are issues that you need to know as far as the rule of law is concerned. Michael, I think I will stop there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayowi. Thank you very much, my panelists. I'll just close that question with a very quick observation. When I think about the knowledge and digital economy, there are two things that make me very excited. One is how it promotes equity. Right? So in the last few days, we've spoken a lot about natural advantages that this state has over others. And those natural advantages are very important. Right? But we don't often talk as much about the natural disadvantages, right? A very simple example is that there are states in this country that are bordering the ocean, so they are naturally port cities. Now, the reality with the physical economy is if I want to export from Nasarawa, I have to travel across the country and get to a port that is by the water. The beauty of the digital economy is that it does not matter where you are located. I'm able to export right here from my phone. If I'm providing a digital product or service, I'm not constrained by borders, land, and so on, right? And there are many examples of this, right? So one amazing thing about the digital economy is how it provides similar opportunities in ways that the physical economy just can't replicate. But the other key thing really, and in my view, the most important is scale. So a couple of times already, people have referenced the valuations of Zenith Bank and Flutterwave, right? Now, people sometimes ask, how is it possible that a company like Flutterwave, which is barely 5 years old, can grow to become so highly valued so quickly? And the answer is scale. They are able to, in theory, reach a much larger market much quicker because they are digital first. Zenith's Bank first and primary market was the 200 million people in Nigeria. From day one, Flutterwave's primary market was 1.2 billion people in Africa. Right? And they are able to reach them much quicker and easier than traditional businesses. So that equity and scale potential is really what gets me excited about the digital economy. I think it's now important that we start talking about how we get there, right? And I will start with Farida, who is a digital development specialist with the World Bank, so has a lot of experience in terms of helping countries and states move forward on this path. So Farida, from your experience, can you start off by just sharing some good models or best practices for achieving this transition?
Thank you. So at the World Bank Group, there is a particular foundational model that was developed by the World Bank Group, and it's currently adopted by the African Union as the current framework for any economy that wants to key into the digital economy to expand, the economy and also fast track the growth of the economy. And that framework is leveraged on 5 high-level pillars and some certain indicators that you can use to measure if you are actually doing the right thing or not. And those 5 pillars are digital infrastructure, digital finance, digital public platforms, digital business, and digital skills. So for digital infrastructure, the thing that we're looking at is, increase in access to broadband internet, increase in quality of broadband internet, as well as increase in the affordability of broadband internet. Now, when we're talking about the affordability, what the general consensus that is adopted by the UN Broadband Commission and ECOWAS is the 1-for-2 model. And the 1-for-2 model simply means that 1 gigabyte of data should be equal to or less than 2% of your monthly income as an individual. So if, for example, you're earning 5,000 naira per month, so what's the 2% of 5,000 naira, 50,000 naira rather? That would be 1,000 naira. And that 1,000 naira should be able to afford you 1 gigabyte of data, or even, less than 1,000 should afford you 1 gigabyte of data. Now, when we're looking at, digital skills, we're also looking at, availability of a digitally competent workforce. And when we're looking at digital public platforms, which is also another pillar. So for digital public platforms, the indicators that we're looking at is, the availability of secured and interoperable platforms for public services. Just in the cases whereby you find, public institutes like MDAs, they use public digital platforms to render services to the citizens. Things like, there's the citizens portal, if I can remember, in the budget office, where citizens can actually go on and see how the budgeting process is going on. So those are the things, those are part of, the digital public platforms. And another indicator for the, the digital public platforms is the identity. Identity is actually the right of every citizen in a country. Every citizen of a country needs to be uniquely identified, which is, in the case of the National Identity Management Commission that is issuing the NIN, the NIN NINs that were, they're currently campaigning for everybody to get onboarded. Actually, that's my own specialty area at World Bank Group. I'm leading the, scaling up of the digital identity system to be able to, take up to 200 million Nigerians. And we're looking at it in terms of privacy, security, and overall system architecture. So that's what I'm leading at the World Bank Group. And so now when we're looking at digital finance, we're also looking at the increase of, increase and access to usage of digital financial services, like in the cases of, Flutterwave, Paystack, and every other, digital financial service available. And what other parts haven't I talked of? Business, digital business. So on digital business, an indicator that you can use to measure that is, the increase in digital startups in that particular state, or increase in number of, data-driven firms that are operating or have their HQ in that particular state. So that's, the framework that that has been developed by the World Bank Group and has been adopted by the AU, and that's the framework that we're using currently to deploy some of the solutions that we're deploying and working across, West Africa, right, in terms of digital development.
Thank you very much, Farida. That was very comprehensive. Like I mentioned before, I'm a big fan of the 5 pillars model. Just to practicalize some of the things that she said, right? There's been recent news related to each of these pillars, right? So very recently, on the infrastructure side, I know Google just announced the undersea cable that is going to run from South Africa to Nigeria, and that's going to make a very big difference in terms of access and quality of internet in the country. Also, a few weeks ago, when we look at digital finance, the CBN finally licensed MTN Nigeria to start their payment service bank. Now, mobile money is something that has made a very big difference in Ghana, Kenya, Uganda, and so on, and people are betting a lot of money that Nigeria is going to have an even larger mobile money revolution. She spoke about identity. I think we were just speaking before this panel how yesterday a Nigerian startup recently announced a $2.8 million raise, and they're focused on digital identity, right? So there's a lot of things happening in this space, and I think the best advice that I'll give subnational governments that I'm sure that Farida would echo is not taking these pillars in isolation, because they tend to work best when you tackle them at the same time, right? Not always, but if you focus on infrastructure, it's always good to see how you can layer a digital skills or finance part as well. So just moving on from that and going to Dr. Sam. Now, one thing that a lot of subnationals have been looking at in terms of this digital economy is how do they attract entrepreneurs, skilled workers, investors, and so on, to come and build the businesses, platforms, and so on, that can help build the subnational digital economy. So as, a stakeholder in the States, my question to you then is, how can Nasarawa become a net importer of digital skills and digital businesses over the next 5 to 10 years?
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's an important question, because there's a tendency for us to confuse technology footprint and digital economy and knowledge economy. Because yes, information infrastructure is critical for diffusion of knowledge and skills and for innovation. But the underlying it actually is first education and skilling. So the question is, how does Nasarawa become net exporter? First, if you look at the experience across the world, you have to look both at the physical infrastructure and the software infrastructure, to put it that way. Oftentimes, everybody wants to be a knowledge economy, but the social environment, the ecosystem that nurtures innovation, which is at the heart of knowledge economy, is missing in many places. So, for example, Nasarawa is close to Abuja, which is somewhat of a cosmopolitan because of a mixture of diplomatic, international, financial, commercial organizations. So it could be a place that people would like to stay more in Nasarawa. You can create, for example, innovation clusters, estates where maybe knowledge centers. Today, people are renting offices and small offices where they have all the broadband, they have all the facilities, and they also meet with other knowledge workers. The ecosystem of innovation is that people who are innovators also need to work in clusters. They have to work in group. They have to have access to subsidiary services that nurture and sustain creativity. So if Nasarawa wants to attract skilled workers, skilled people, knowledge workers, and export most of that, both the knowledge and the product that come out of it, then they have to make the state more attractive to the profile. You have to profile who do you want to get to live in Nasarawa. And what we are learning now is that city branding is critical. Nations are branding themselves, cities are branding themselves. So when you brand yourself by the mixture of social facilities, mixture of messaging, communication, provision of a conducive environment, and again, culture, critical. Culture is the, if you like, invisible, abstract infrastructure that's critical for innovation. So people would like to come to a place where they're more comfortable, free. Security matters, the sense of, but basically, even if you guarantee security and people are not comfortable, they will not come. So I would like to argue for 3 critical things they will do. First, we need to also improve education in the states. The bedrock of innovation is that there is some degree of improvement on basic education. If you take, for example, Bangalore in India, people talk about the migration of Indians to Bangalore, but you need to have some rudimentary educational support services. People who can be good clerks, good programmers to support the high-end, innovative, whether it's digital or otherwise work that professionals like to do. So if reskilling, after school, in Imo State under Governor, one of the previous governors, we did what we call finishing school. We located that the skill set of graduates are very low. So you use a finishing school to update them so that they can backstop more professional work that professionals who would like to live in Nasarawa will undertake. So if I'm a guy returning from America and I want to set up where do I live, I'd say Nasarawa has good enough support services in terms of educated citizens. They have clusters where people can integrate and mix. Even cafes, these are very important because knowledge workers have certain behaviors and certain ecosystem where they thrive. And if they thrive, they populate. And therefore, the state can now become a place first of attraction for certain profile of people who are persons, professionals. Again, infrastructure is important. We talked about I've seen a lot of roads work being done. It doesn't have to be high-speed train or all that, but at least safe accessibility so that people can easily move to Abuja and move out. That's also very important. And finally, I think the temper of government is important here. And it's important that the government is the one that respects liberties of citizens, respect proprietary rights, protect innovation, protect due process, because no professional worker or knowledge creator of value will want to live in a place that's capricious, where you're not sure of your inventions, you're not sure of your rights, you're not sure of even your rent. So I think it's really a matter of deepening a sense in which government strategically build up the state to be a state that both accommodates knowledge workers and also help to nurture and foster their creativity by providing some of these support services. And I would say a low-hanging fruit will be updating the quality of education through after-school training, finishing school, and of course, on-the-job training for civil servants.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sam. I think what's very interesting about the recommendations that you've provided is that in bits and pieces, we've seen this succeed in Nigeria. I think Lagos State, the Yabakon Valley, as they call it, is a prime example of that success over the last 10 years, where the Lagos State government allowed digital infrastructure to grow in that cluster, and then youths came in and built the businesses, institutions, and the ecosystem around that, right? And it's very interesting because I know that that is being replicated in different parts of the country, in Jigawa, in Kaduna, Abuja, and there's definitely potential for that to happen now that the model has been validated in parts of the country. So I'll just turn to Mr. Mayowi because you raised the issue of rule of law, and we have an expert here. So I guess the question essentially for you, sir, is in promoting this knowledge-based economy, what role do subnationals have to play in terms of ensuring a friendly environment for investors and businesses to thrive? Is Mr. Mayowi still there?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so your question is, what role does multinationals? Do you mean multinationals or the state government?
Subnationals, so state governments, local governments, and all the agencies.
Right. In fact, I would start off with the very interesting example that you gave, that you shared just now, about the Lagos Silicon Valley, if I can use that description. The Lagos state government has been very supportive of this initiative, and they've consciously promoted this project such that Microsoft and other international software developers actually came to come and see what is happening. And I've seen a lot of partnerships here on ground in between international software developers and these youths that are in the Yaba Valley. And it is contributing to the economy of Lagos. So it boils down to the interest of the government in promoting a project that will not only generate income, not only build up the economy of the state, but that will also keep the youth busy. I mean, I know of several youths that probably will have drifted into probably crime or something, but they have been caught up even in this project. So this is something that the Nasarawa state government should look at, particularly talking about a digital economy. If this project alone can be replicated in Nasarawa state, that will be a huge achievement for the national state government. Even if it's not in the area of ICT, as Silicon Valley has done now in Lagos, even if national state government decides to pitch its tent with any of the dormant economy, I use the word dormant because probably those sectors are not being properly looked at. All it takes is for the government to pick 1, 2, 3 major projects and say, we are going with this. A few years ago, I'm aware that Kwara State government was consciously promoting agriculture, and they were the one that accepted these farmers from, I think, Zimbabwe, and it was a huge success, although I'm not sure whether the follow-up governments were indeed able to sustain that tempo. So at the end of the day, it comes down to interest, it comes down to continuity, and I would close with it also comes down to the rule of law. Because there is bound to be friction between investors and the state. That is normal. What is abnormal is the way that those frictions are managed. If those disputes are mismanaged, that will be the end of the partnership. So there must be a political will, there must also be a judicial will. And of course, at the end of the day, everyone benefits. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayowi, and thank you again for emphasizing that rule of law points. I think it's important that we go down and talk about some micro issues in the knowledge-based economy, right? And I'll start off again with Farida. One thing that is clear is that there is a significant gender imbalance, well, in the traditional economy, but also in the information economy, right? So I was looking at some of the startup funding numbers in Nigeria over the last few years, and up until April this year, you know, about almost $5 billion has come into Nigeria from 2019 till date in startup funding. But when you look at that funding, right, when you look at all male or all men founding teams, they account for about 70% of that funding. Mixed founding teams account for somewhere between 20 to 25%. When you then look at all female founding teams, they are barely at 7% of that total funding. Now, this is incredible because there's a lot of research over and over again that's come out to again warn everyone that there's an inefficiency here in that female founders are, on average, more successful. So I think the last research that I saw from the Boston Consulting Group is that in the US, for every dollar that goes to male founders, they generate 31 cents in revenues. Whereas for every dollar that goes to female founders, they generate about $73 in revenues. So why is this inequality persistent, and more importantly, how can we address it structurally as we promote the knowledge-based economy?
Thank you, Mike. This is actually a very important question. So the first thing that I would say, I'm just going to say a word, co-creation. Now I'm going to explain why I said co-creation, and then at the end of the day, you would understand why I am always hinging on co-creation. Now, recently, I think it was in January, I was reading a report by International Telecommunications Union. They recently launched the Digital Africa Trends for 2020. And in that report, it said only about 20% of women in the entirety of Africa were recorded online in that entire year, compared to 37% of men. And what is the reason? That actually shows that there is a serious digital gender divide, and it keeps on growing and exacerbating. And why is that? It's because of, you know, things like bullying on the internet, things like targeted harassment on the internet, things like sexual harassment on the internet. Now, these are part of the problems. Now, when we're talking about the solution, we're still going to come back to co-creation in user-centered design. And to save you all the, you know, jargons in technology and technical terms, I'm just going to give you a typical example. This is something that a case study that we did while in my MBA class, and I like to use it as an example to solve this particular question or to answer this particular question. Now, in the UK, I think it was in the US, there's this particular company that wanted to launch a product targeted for breastfeeding mothers. It was a new product for, pumping the breast milk. It was a digital digital pump for the breast milk. Now, that particular product is targeted at breastfeeding mothers. Now, that entire company, they decided not to do their marketing in-house. They decided to bring an outside firm, an outside marketing firm, to come and run the ads and promotion for that particular product that they wanted to launch. This particular firm, they are the best. They came with their strategy, with their all-men team. They put out the strategy. They looked at the numbers. They chunked the numbers. They were like, okay, this product is actually what we've been looking for, what we've been waiting for. It's the next best thing that's going to happen to this company since jollof rice. It's going to bring back the numbers. They went with that strategy. They launched the product, and the product failed woefully. And they couldn't decipher what the problem was. So now someone within the team decided to bring an expert, an independent expert, to come and look at the numbers, look at the strategy, and look at the problem and try to find the solution. And that person so happened to be a female. They brought her onto the team to look at the problem. The first thing she said, let me look at your marketing strategy. She looked at it and she laughed. And they were like, okay, what's funny? Why are you laughing? She said, your product can never see the day of light, like the light of day. Why? Because your marketing strategy is wrong. Why is it wrong? You are trying to sell a product for a breastfeeding mother. What time of the day do you think a breastfeeding mother is available to look at your ad? Is it in the afternoon or is it in the morning? As women, we know that, as a breastfeeding mother, the best time, the only time that you have for yourself, because in 24 hours of the day, the time is always spent on the child. But the little time that you can have accorded to yourself is in the early hours of the morning when you're breastfeeding your child, somewhere around 3 a.m., 4 a.m., 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. Now, when you're breastfeeding your child in that period, you don't have any other extracurricular activity that is taking away your attention. So the next thing you want to do is carry your phone and check your messages, check your emails, check your WhatsApp, check your Instagram, and see what's going on in the world, because that's the only time you have. Now, at that point in time, if you see an ad of a new digital breast pump, you would want to key into it and see, oh, okay, this actually looks like a good thing. I think I need it. Because at that point in time, I'm actually even breastfeeding my child. And that was what turned around the strategy for that particular company. She changed that particular strategy based on the timing that the ad was being showed. And that was how that company raised a lot and lots of money from that product. They relaunched the product, relaunched the strategy, and they made the money. So now what's the problem that is, here, what I'm trying to show you here is the lack of co-creation when it comes to doing these things, when it comes to policies, when it comes to product, when it comes to the digital economy, when it comes to whatever it is that we're looking at. As long as there won't be co-creation and there won't be user-centered design approach to doing things, whether it is a program, whether it is a product, we'll continue to have the deficit of women representation in these things. I hope I've communicated clearly. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic, Farida. I love the anecdote. And it's just a reminder about getting the right people into the room. Not to fill a quota, but to get the job done well. Right, and I think that's a message that needs to be echoed in every boardroom, in every conference room, in every meeting. It is the best way of getting the job done, ultimately. Just moving on to an issue in the knowledge economy of innovation, right? Because one way we can gauge the success of the knowledge economy is to what extent is there creativity and innovation. One marker of that is patents. right? Patents, copyrights, trademarks, and so on. Now, when you look at patent submissions and approvals, Nigeria isn't doing particularly well. You look at patents per 1 million people, and Nigeria produces about 1 patent for every 1 million citizens. You look at a country like Kenya, and I think they produce like 5 patents per million people. You look at it by GDP, and again, we aren't doing very well. Nigeria produces about 15 patents for every $100 billion generated in GDP. Kenya is a much smaller economy, but for every $100 billion generated, it produces over 150 patents. So clearly, we are lagging behind. Now, I bring this to the legal, IP, and governance experts. How do we address our IP issues? Because clearly, they're very important for promoting a knowledge-based economy. So, on to you, Dr. Sam.
Thank you very much. I think if you look at the data about comparative between Nigeria and Kenya, then flip it to the rating of universities. If you look at the African, whether you look at the higher curriculum of higher education, or you look at any of other world web-based assessments, or you are looking at quality of the number of publications in journals, Kenya does far better than Nigeria universities. Kenya universities do far better than Nigeria universities. So first, the quality of education is important here, because patents are innovations, products of intellectual work. So we're not seeing enough of that because we're not also fostering research and innovation even in the universities. So I used to tell people that apart from literature, maybe, Nigerian universities are not producing masterpieces in any other area. Most Nigerian scholars, even in literature, the best Nigerian literature is probably one of the best in the world, but they are diaspora mostly, or artists who are NGOs in Nigeria, or who are working in other civic spaces. So in the last 20 years, in the 1970s and 80s and 90s, the best Nigerian writers were Nigerian creative thinkers in Nigerian universities. From Wole Soyinka, Chinua Achebe, all of them, they were basically Neo Shudere, they were all products of Nigerian university. So the Nigerian universities and other institutions are not producing enough research, innovation, and they're not feeding into creativity in form of patents and all that. The second problem, again, because from the data, you look at what's driving what's the problem that's reflecting in data. If you look at many of these, Kenya, for example, you can see some degree of handshake between scholars, entrepreneurs, and technocrats. So the industry annex learning and innovation is happening more in those areas than in Nigeria. So the Nigerian enterprises are not connecting to institutes and scholars so that they provide both the financing, both the market, attraction for market, that will enable experts, whether in the area of technical or otherwise, to develop research and produce these patents and register them, make money from them, and of course, businesses will now use them, commercialize them for market to create wealth. So I think this is an area also that Nasarawa should work on. We're talking about natural resources and biodiversity. This is time to commission research, R&D development, create not those companies that came here today to talk about what they're doing. They should also think in terms of, even if it's a small centers that can harness scholarship and entrepreneurship so that we can help some of these, our smart young boys, to begin to innovate, because the knowledge in your brain will not become patent except you use it to innovate. And that innovation will respond to a market, respond to some level of entrepreneurship and support system, which not just government, but companies can provide. So we need to bring that handshake, integrate scholarship, business, and policy, so that we create some kind of clustering where innovators can begin to, they see the reward and they start creating. There are many people in the streets, I see on social media, people who say they develop X, Y, Z. Young people, those people can be nurtured And before you know it, they will develop world-class products, and we will improve our patent index. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Sam. I will soon go to Mr. Mayowi to contribute to that question, but just want to, again, give a practical example there, because I know that one company that has taken this on quite aggressively all over the world is Microsoft, and very recently they launched their Africa Development Center somewhere in Ikoyi in Lagos, and a big part of it, I think one goal is to train 60,000 developers in Nigeria, right? So this idea of private sector, education, and policy coming together is critical for us to grow our knowledge-based economy. So just going on to you, Mr. Mayowi, from an IP law perspective, perhaps, how do we address our innovation problem in the knowledge economy?
The statistics that you reeled out now are quite fascinating. But looking at it from a slightly different point of view, I think there are other causes for that problem. Number one is ignorance. Every now and then, I see BBC Africa showcase one young person that has just did something fantastic. And I say, wait a minute, this program actually takes you through what this boy has done. I remember there's the case of a boy that had a bicycle that he put the engine of a motorcycle inside that bicycle, and it takes it to work every day. And that documentary showed step by step how he did it. Where is the protection for him? So I think the number one problem is actually ignorance. I think there's a huge problem of ignorance in our people, that there are some creativity that ought to be protected. Then secondly, this other side of that coin is the enforcement problem. And I think for me, that's where the major problem lies. Our intellectual property laws in Nigeria, or rather the enforcement of those laws, is appalling. If you go through our law reports, how many cases of enforcement do you see there? How many? I remember some years ago, in the area of copyright now, not patent, there's this musician, Daddy Shoki, that we all know. Daddy Shoki said he stopped doing cassettes or CDs because all his works have been pirated. And that is the story that we hear from practically every creative Nigerian, that their works are not being protected. So to now relate it back home now, so Nasarawa State probably encourages a local Silicon Valley or a local industry or a digital economy. Where is the IP laws? Where is the enforcement of those laws? If you cannot go around those two basic questions, then we can't even talk about IP laws in about any IP protection in Nasarawa at all. And where there is no law, where there is no protection, where there is no reward system, then of course there will be nobody applying for patent. Because what is the use of applying for a patent that is not recognizable? What is the use of obtaining a patent that you cannot protect? Those are the basic questions that we need to address.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayowi. Thank you so very much, panelists, for contributing today. We'll just close now with final words and recommendations for the states. So remember, our charge was, how can the states promote a knowledge-based economy? You've all shared great insights. I will now push you for actionable recommendations. I'm happy to lead by example. I think the two things that I'll highlight to the state are, one, the importance of building data infrastructure in the state, strengthening data collection capabilities, because the backbone of any knowledge-based economy is data and information, right? The second is in terms of attracting more startup talent and businesses. I know the Nigerian Startup Bill is in the National Assembly, but even while that is being discussed, I know a number of states are localizing the bill, right? I know Kaduna, Lagos, and a few are talking about that, right? So that's an easy win that can be recommended as well. So we'll start from Mr. Mayowi so that we can also let him go. Can you just close with a few recommendations to help the state on this path towards building a knowledge-based economy?
Thank you very much, Michael. I'll close with just two recommendations. If you recall, where I started from is I said there are two things that basically keep an investor awake at night. And those two things are, one, the profitability of his investments. Is my investment profitable? And secondly, the fear of losing his money. And from the legal perspective, my recommendations is, one, the judicial system has to be strengthened with capable hands. One recurrent problem that we have in all judicial systems is appointing people who are not really competent as judges. When you do that, then your judicial system is going to be filled with mediocres, and the enforcement of law is going to be a strong challenge. That means an investor cannot comfortably come to Nasarawa State because he fears that the judge will give judgment in favor of a local competitor, or because he's not a local person. That's number one. Secondly, and the last one, we just spoke now about data, digital economy, and we rested on the issue of our IP laws. There is nothing that stops Nasarawa from having a strong IP policy and law. Nothing absolutely. Although it is arguable that the Constitution confers the Federal Court with copyright, etc., protection. I note that there is a small claims court, but those small claims courts can do a lot in the protection of data, in the protection of digital economy, in the protection of the ideas that local entrepreneurs will have. If you focus a bit of attention on this, very soon we hope to see a Nasarawa, or call it a Lafayette Silicon Valley system. Thank you very much.
Okay. So for me, for my last words or actionable steps that I would leave Nasarawa State with is I would emphasize on leveraging the principles of digital development. It's there, you can check it on our World Bank website, or you can, in fact, you can just Google principles of digital development. I'm sure the website would come up for you, and you would see them. I think they're about 9 in number. And for whatever you want to engage in the knowledge-based economy, in the digital economy, you should always fall back to those principles. They're very easy, and when you look at it and you read it, you see that it actually applies in the everyday process. Things like, you need to be data-driven. You need to understand the existing ecosystem before you even design any program or any project. You need to also design with the user in mind. Just like the case of the breast pump that I explained to you. Men were, designing billboards, doing billboards campaign, whereas the campaigns that they were supposed to do were completely different because the people that mattered and supposed to be in the room were not in the room. So you need to co-create, you need to, design for sustainability, design for scale, and you need to ensure that you're using open standards, open innovation, and you have to be data-driven.
Thank you very much. Well, I think, like I said, Nasarawa has great potential. Its proximity to Abuja is an asset, but then knowledge economy is a strategic work. You have to do the proper diagnosis of opportunities and challenges and craft your strategies around those opportunities. So that you need to carry out a scientific needs assessment of the state in terms of its natural resources, and then all knowledge economies are niche economies. They have areas that they focus based on their competitive advantage. And so it's important also to rethink the education curriculum and pedagogy to enable Nasarawa maximize its advantage in natural resources and biodiversity, so that when you are raising graduates, there are people who have that knowledge, investment in R&D, very important. And of course, it should be targeted towards the competitive advantage that we have. Nothing stops states from having technology transfers. The world has evolved in a way that sub-nationalities can engage and leverage on international conventions to transfer technology, medium technology, from outside the country to help in driving knowledge economy. And again, as a professor of law myself and the director of a center, I agree. The laws are there. What we may have to do is have a task force, some kind of small study group, to look at all the policy framework to utilize the law around IP protection, so that if skilled people know that Nasarawa provides the best-in-class protection of digital product, they have attraction to come and stay in Nasarawa. And then finally, I think, like I said, we need to really understand that you won't get the result through half-hearted. You have to have a coherent and almost comprehensive integration of your reforms, so that a knowledge economy will require not just one-off engagement, continuous nurturing of skills, improvement of education, job training, retraining, finishing schools, even the civil society, civil service reform in the Nasarawa economic development strategy is a good one. So you have to have also civil servants who have disposition towards knowledge workers and who imbibe some of the practices that facilitate ease of doing business for these knowledge workers. So ultimately, I think this calls for strategy, and strategy is about diagnosis, it's about opportunities, it's also about leveraging, and that's what I would say at this point.
Thank you very much, panelists. Thank you very much, audience. It's been a pleasure being here today.